Solo One Media. Subscribe.
Hello King Solo One Media family, you are all welcome back. On today's history segment we bring you everything you must know about Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My name is King Solo, you can call me King to the Solo. Please subscribe to the channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all be King Solo One Media. Thank you. The history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict traces back to the late 19th century when Zionists sought to establish a homeland for the Jewish people in Ottoman-controlled Palestine. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, issued by the British government, endorsed the idea of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, which led to an influx of Jewish immigrants to the region. Following World War II and the Holocaust, international pressure mounted for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine, leading to the creation of Israel in 1948. The establishment of Israel, and the war that followed and preceded it, led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who became refugees, sparking a decades-long conflict between Israel and the Palestinian people. The Palestinians seek to establish their own independent state in at least a part of historic Palestine. Israeli defense of its own borders, control over the West Bank, the Egyptian-Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip, and Palestinian internal politics currently make this goal out of reach. Numerous peace negotiations have taken place over the years, but a lasting peace agreement has remained elusive. The conflict has been marked by violence, including terrorist attacks by Palestinian militants and military operations by Israel. The United States and other countries have played a key role in attempting to broker peace, but many obstacles remain, including the issue of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, the status of Jerusalem, and the ultimate fate of Palestinian refugees. Now let's go into the background a bit. History of the Jews and Judaism in the land of Israel and Islam in Palestine. National movements. Zionism, Arab nationalism, and Palestinian nationalism. Before World War I, the Middle East region, including the Ottoman Syria, the southern part of which are regarded as Palestine, was under the control of the Ottoman Empire for nearly 400 years. Towards the end of the 19th century, Palestine, which was divided between the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem, Syria Vilayet and Beirut Vilayet, was inhabited predominantly by Arab Muslims, both farmers and Bedouin, principally in the Negev and Jordan Valley, with smaller numbers of Christians, mostly Arabs, Druze, Circassians and Jews, predominantly Sephardic. At that time most of the Jews worldwide lived outside Palestine, predominantly in Eastern and Central Europe, with significant communities in the Mediterranean, the Middle East and the Americas. The roots of the conflict can be traced to the late 19th century, with the rise of national movements, including Zionism and Arab nationalism. Though the Jewish aspiration to return to Zion had been part of Jewish religious thought for more than a millennium, the Jewish population of Europe and to some degree Middle East began to more actively discuss immigration back to the land of Israel, and the re-establishment of the Jewish nation, only between 1859 and the 1880s, largely as a solution to the widespread persecution of Jews, and anti-Semitism in Russia and Europe. As a result, the Zionist movement, the modern movement for the creation of a homeland for the Jewish people, was established as a political movement in 1897. The Zionist movement called for the establishment of a nation-state for the Jewish people in Palestine, which would serve as a haven for the Jews of the world and in which they would have the right for self-determination. Zionists increasingly came to hold that this state should be in their historic homeland, which they referred to as the Land of Israel. The World Zionist Organization and the Jewish National Fund encouraged immigration and funded purchase of land, both under Ottoman rule and under British rule, in the region of Palestine, while Arab nationalism, at least in an early form, and Syrian nationalism were the dominant tendencies, along with continued loyalty to the Ottoman state, in the area. The conflict. For a chronological guide, see Timeline of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. 1948-49 War, Israel and the Arab states. See also, 1948 Arab-Israeli War, Israeli Declaration of Independence, All-Palestine Government, Occupation of the Gaza Strip by Egypt and Jordanian annexation of the West Bank. Palestinian refugees in 1948. The termination of the British Mandate over Palestine and the Israeli Declaration of Independence sparked a full-scale war, 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which erupted after May 14, 1948. On 15–16 May, the four armies of Jordan, Syria, Egypt and Iraq invaded/intervened in what had been the area of the British Mandate, followed not long after by units from Lebanon. In the introduction to the cablegram from the Secretary-General of the League of Arab States to the UN Secretary-General on May 15, 1948, the Arab League gave reasons for its intervention, on the occasion of the intervention of Arab states in Palestine to restore law and order and to prevent disturbances prevailing in Palestine from spreading into their territories and to check further bloodshed. Clause 10a of the cablegram provided. 10. Now that the mandate over Palestine has come to an end, leaving no legally constituted authority behind in order to administer law and order in the country and afford the necessary and adequate protection to life and property, the Arab states declare as follows. A. The right to set up a government in Palestine pertains to its inhabitants under the principles of self-determination recognized by the Covenant of the League of Nations as well as the United Nations Charter. United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine 1947. The 1949 Green Line borders. While Arab commanders ordered villagers to evacuate for military purposes in isolated areas, there is no evidence that the Arab leadership made a blanket call for evacuation, and in fact most urged Palestinians to stay in their homes. Assaults by the Haganah on major Arab population centers like Jaffa and Haifa as well as expulsions carried out by groups like the Irgun and Lehi such as at Deir Yassin and Lydda led to the exodus of large portions of the Arab masses. Factors such as the earlier flight by the Palestinian elite and the psychological effects of Jewish atrocities, stories which both sides propagated, also played important roles in the Palestinian flight. The war resulted in an Israeli victory, with Israel annexing territory beyond the partition borders for a proposed Jewish state and into the borders for a proposed Palestinian Arab state. Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt signed the 1949 armistice agreements with Israel. The remaining territories, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, were occupied by Egypt and Transjordan, respectively. Jordan also annexed East Jerusalem while Israel administered West Jerusalem. In 1950, the West Bank was unilaterally incorporated into Jordan. Refugees. Between 700,000 and 750,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from the area that became Israel and became what is known today as the Palestinian refugees. The Palestinian refugees were not allowed to return to Israel, and most of the neighboring Arab states, with the exception of Transjordan, denied granting them, or their descendants, citizenship. In 1949, Israel offered to allow some members of families that had been separated during the war to return, to release refugee accounts frozen in Israeli banks, and to repatriate 100,000 refugees. The Arab states rejected this compromise, at least in part because they were unwilling to take any action that might be construed as recognition of Israel. As of today, most of them still live in refugee camps, and the question of how their situation should be resolved remains one of the main issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Due to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, about 856,000 Jews fled or were expelled from their homes in Arab countries, and most were forced to abandon their property. 54. Jews from Libya, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon and North Africa left due to physical and political insecurity, with the majority being forced to abandon their properties. 260,000 reached Israel in 1948 to 1951, 600,000 by 1972. While most of the Palestinian Arab population that remained in Israel after the war was granted an Israeli citizenship, Arab Israelis were subject to martial law up to 1966. A variety of legal measures facilitated the transfer of land abandoned by Arabs to state ownership. In 1966, security restrictions placed on Arab citizens of Israel were lifted completely. The government set about dismantling most of the discriminatory laws, and Arab citizens of Israel were granted the same rights as Jewish citizens. After the 1948 war, some of the Palestinian refugees who lived in camps in the West Bank within Jordanian-controlled territory, the Gaza Strip Egyptian-controlled territory and Syria tried to return by infiltration into Israeli territory, and some of those Palestinians who had remained in Israel were declared infiltrators by Israel and were deported. Ben-Gurion emphatically rejected the return of refugees in the Israeli cabinet decision of June 1948, reiterated in a letter to the UN of August 2, 1949, containing the text of a statement made by Moshe Sharett on August 1, 1948, where the basic attitude of the Israeli government was that a solution must be sought, not through the return of the refugees to Israel, but through the resettlement of the Palestinian Arab refugee population in other states. 1993 to 2000, Oslo Peace Process. Oslo Accords. Yitzhak Rabin, Bill Clinton, and Yasser Arafat during the Oslo Accords on September 13, 1993. In January 1993, Israeli and Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, negotiators began secret negotiations in Oslo, Norway. On September 9, 1993, Yasser Arafat sent a letter to Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, stating that the PLO officially recognized Israel's right to exist and officially renouncing terrorism. 73. On September 13, Arafat and Rabin signed a declaration of principles in Washington, D.C., on the basis of the negotiations between Israeli and Palestinian teams in Oslo, Norway. The declaration was a major conceptual breakthrough achieved outside of the Madrid framework, which specifically barred foreign residing PLO leaders from the negotiation process. After this, a long process of negotiation known as the Oslo Peace Process began. One of the main features of the Oslo Peace Process was the establishment of the Autonomous Governmental Authority, the Palestinian Authority, and its associated governing institutions to administer Palestinian communities in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. In February 1994, Baruch Goldstein, a follower of the Catch Party, murdered 29 Palestinians and wounded 125 at the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron, which became known as the Cave of the Patriarchs Massacre. As an act of revenge to the massacre, in April 1994, Hamas launched suicide attacks targeting the Israeli civilian population in many locations throughout Israel. However, once the Hamas started to use these means, it became a regular pattern of action against Israel. On September 28, 1995, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat signed the Israeli-Palestinian Interim Agreement on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in Washington. The agreement marked the conclusion of the first stage of negotiations between Israel and the PLO. The agreement allowed the PLO leadership to relocate to the occupied territories and granted autonomy to the Palestinians, with talks to follow regarding final status. In return, the Palestinians recognized Israel's right to exist and promised to abstain from use of terror. Tensions in Israel, arising from the continuation of terrorism and anger at loss of territory, led to the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin by a right-wing Jewish radical on November 4, 1995. Upon Rabin's assassination, the Israeli Prime Minister's post was filled by Shimon Peres. Peres continued Rabin's policies in supporting the peace process. In 1996, increasing Israeli doubts about the peace process led to Benjamin Netanyahu of the Likud party winning the election, mainly due to his promise to use a more rigid line in the negotiations with the Palestinian Authority. Netanyahu raised many questions about many central premises of the Oslo process. One of his main points was disagreement with the Oslo premise that the negotiations should proceed in stages, meaning that concessions should be made to Palestinians before any resolution was reached on major issues, such as the status of Jerusalem, and the amending of the Palestinian National Charter. Oslo supporters had claimed that the multi-stage approach would build goodwill among Palestinians and would propel them to seek reconciliation when these major issues were raised in later stages. Netanyahu said that these concessions only gave encouragement to extremist elements, without receiving any tangible gestures in return. He called for tangible gestures of Palestinian goodwill in return for Israeli concessions. This is a far history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to fuel our passion and keep the content flowing. We're excited to have you on board.